Let me start with my pedigree. I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. I know almost everything there is to know about the lore. I finished all of the game except for Resident Evil 0 and a couple of others. I think that Resident Evil 7 was a great addition to the genre, and they were starting to finally realize what the game is all about, which is the survivor horror. That's what this IP coined. Resident Evil 2 Remake blew me away. I think it was Game of the Year material. It was hands down one of the best zombie video games in the industry. Like, I would recommend it to any person that likes survival horror. Like, you need to play Resident Evil 2 Remake. And then they dropped the ball with Resident Evil 3 Remake, and finally they do this colossal dumpster fire, which in my opinion is Resident Evil 8, and I will give you the arguments for why you're wrong and I am right. Let's start with the objective thing. Why is the game only 10 hours long? I mean, if you're going to pay full price for a game, which doesn't have multiplayer, has very little in the way of replayability, why is the game 10 hours long? And I finished it in 10 hours, I live streamed it, but it's only because I played on hard mode, and it's only because I was focusing on talking with the chat. But if I were to replay the game right now, let's say I play it on normal or easy mode, and I skip the cutscenes, it's probably 1 hour and a half, 2 hours of gameplay. That is just abysmal. I don't really think it's okay to charge a full price game that much when you have so little content in. The second thing, which is plainly obvious, is that this game is built around the Resident Evil 7 engine. Resident Evil 7 is a horror game. Resident Evil 8 is not a horror game. The developers themselves came out and they said that they don't want to make a horror game because the publisher told them not to. They said that people don't want to play a horror game, which is completely not true. Resident Evil 2 Remake sold 7.8 million copies. Why is that? Because it actually did horror right. It didn't try to do a little bit of everything. It focused on its strengths, and it managed to polish the game to the point where now I think it's a 10 out of 10 game, and it's a classic. I would recommend it to any person that likes survival horror all the way up with other games like Dead Space and Silent Hill. Resident Evil 2 Remake is a must play. This Resident Evil 8 isn't great. Why? Because it uses the engine of Resident Evil 7. As I mentioned, it's a horror game. It's supposed to make the character feel weak. It's supposed to have slow, methodical gameplay where you're trying to sneak around the mansion to hide away from the bakers. This game tries to bring Call of Resident Evil. It throws multiple enemies at you, and you're supposed to just unload into these bullet sponges. So because of that, you have a bad experience. The character is clunky. He's not supposed to fight in combat. When he gets wounded, he barely moves. And most of the boss battles are close quarter combat with bullet sponges. They're not enjoyable. There's no skill aspect into it. Most of the skill comes into blocking properly. So blocking is when you raise your hands up like this, like a moron, and if the boss happens to throw a card at you and hits you, you're dead. But if you manage to raise your hands at the right moment, because you can't dodge, right? You're too slow to strafe or do any cool shit like you do in Doom, then what ends up happening is that you only take a little bit of damage. So I guess this is how the game is played. Just make sure you raise your hands at the right moment. Resident Evil 4, which is what this game is trying to emulate, had a brand new engine. It allowed more freedom of movement. It allowed for the character to do more interesting combat abilities like the roundhouse kick in order to deal away with large swathes of enemies. It had a lot more gameplay time than this. And that's why Resident Evil 4 was a lot better, because it had a completely different engine. And by the way, I don't really like Resident Evil 4. I think it would have been a great spin-off. But Resident Evil, in my opinion, as a fan, it should be about survival horror. Like, this is the game that coined the survival horror, so it should remain as a game that has survival horror. Resident Evil 8 does have a couple of horror elements to it, but all in all, it's meh. I mean, a lot of people really like Lady Dimitrescu. And it's not Dimitrescu, it's Dimitrescu, okay? Because I'm Romanian, I get to tell you how it's pronounced. The problem with this is that you only get to have her for the first hour of the game, and then they blew her away. It's like, meh, you know, very big letdown. and there aren't any other villains to carry the torch as her. I mean, Lady Miranda is completely uninteresting compared to Lady Dimitrescu. I guess Heisenberg is kind of cool, but again, it has these interesting villains that doesn't really do much with them, except like show you a cutscene where your character Ethan is helpless like a little flower as the boss trashes him around in order to show how powerful the boss is, and then you BTFO the boss within 2 minutes of gameplay. So, not my idea of fun. You know, most of the characters in the game actually aren't very well polished. Sure, you know, you got like Lady Dimitrescu, which has like the sex appeal. Like, I don't know what's wrong with people that they like her rather than Lady Bowsette, as it should be, as it's preordained. But people like her. Okay, fine. You like Lady Dimitrescu. What exactly is her character? You know, besides being like sadistic villainess? Not much, you know, and I guess, you know, like Resident Evil isn't really renowned for a series that polishes characters that much, but my god, when you look at the plot, and I'm not going to give the spoilers, but I'm going to give it a little bit in the end. I'll give a warning when I talk about them. Then you realize just how bad the plot is. Well, the atmosphere, right? Like, the atmosphere is supposed to be centered in a Romanian village, Eastern Europe. I'm not going to go around and say, well, you know, like the village isn't at all Romanian looking and blah, 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 and they all speak English. It's like, you know, fine. I guess like Capcom didn't want to hire other voice actors. That's fine. Although they did so for Resident Evil 4, right? Like they hired Spanish actors in order to do the villagers. But like, if you're going to focus the game in an Eastern village, why not have melee combat? Eastern Europe doesn't have guns. It's not the United States. The game would have been a lot more cooler and more visceral, and I think you could have used this engine if you focused more on melee combat. You'd have had the parry, the blocking mechanic that you really want, and then you could like try to engage with the enemies in melee combat. It would have been a lot more visceral, a lot more satisfying, and a lot more great. And you know, give 1 or 2 guns there, just like when Chris Redfield comes up, like, okay, fine, like he can have guns and shit. That would have been a better idea, in my opinion. But you know, okay, so gameplay wise, it's meh. The vibe is definitely not Eastern European. The story, and I'm going to give you now the spoilers, right? So if you don't know the story, stop watching here, because I'm going to give some major spoilers. But if you saw my Let's Play, you probably know. Apparently, the wife of Ethan isn't really his wife. Like, it's Miranda, who is like Mystique from X-Men. She can camouflage herself into becoming whomever she wants. And Chris Redfield comes up in the beginning, shoots Miranda, and then Ethan thinks that Chris killed his wife, and that's how the game starts. And like towards the end, Chris says, "Oh, we didn't have time to explain what was going on." It's like, what do you mean you didn't have time to explain? You literally explained it in like 10 seconds. Like when you reach the end of the game, Chris literally tells you, "Oh, that wasn't really your wife." Like it literally takes 30 seconds to explain the game plot. Like this idea that there is no time to explain is so overused, so cliche. At the start of the game is exactly how the Americans think the police acts. Like you have Chris breaking into the guy's house, shooting his wife, giving no explanations whatsoever, kidnapping his baby, and then one of Chris's goons gives brain damage to Ethan by hitting him in the head with the butt end of a rifle. Like, why? Why would you do that? Like, you would know that Ethan is no threat. He wasn't armed, didn't have any weapons on him, but yet they still treat him like that. Like, the story makes absolutely no sense. It's just made for the sake of raising suspense, I guess, but there's other stories that raise good suspense without being so corny. I mean, if you only spend 10 hours of game time, at least invest some resources into having a great story, you know? If it's not too much to ask, maybe we're going to get a better story in the DLC, huh? How much are we going to pay for that? $40? Yeah, this game literally has nothing going for it. Voice acting bad, gameplay bad, atmosphere bad, very little horror. But for some reason, I like it. I'm not going to lie, okay? The game is enjoyable. For the small time that it lasts, I had fun. I'm not going to lie. Like, look, if I was entertained, I was entertained. What can I say? I had fun. As a Resident Evil fan, completely despise it. If this was just a standalone game that came out, I would be, you know what? Meh, yeah, it's kind of fun. It's not, I don't know why I like it. Like, nothing that I can think of makes me like this game. There's literally nothing in it that I would say, yeah, this. I guess it does mediocre of everything, and somehow it comes together and it's serviceable. That's how I can view it. But other than that, like, I don't know if there is a person that can play this and not have fun while playing it. But again, it's not Resident Evil. Like, it would be an interesting spin-off, but meh. And if you look at the whole story of the game, like the lore, they're afraid to push on the lore anymore. Like, these are some standalone stories that, if they wouldn't existed, nothing would change in the big picture of Resident Evil. I mean, Resident Evil Raccoon City changed things, right? Because now an American city got nuked and Umbrella Corporation had to fall down. Like, it pushed the story along. Resident Evil 4 also pushed the story along. Resident Evil 7 and 8, it's almost like a standalone story of some random guy that's getting through some bad times. Anyway, right, let me know what you guys think. And that's my opinion. It's not a bad game. I think it's overpriced. I had fun, but I can't articulate why. And as a Resident Evil fan, I'm really upset. That's my analysis.